Hi and welcome to the next video in the set regarding purchase orders. This one was all to do with recording an invoice against a purchase order. So this very much assumes that you've already raised an order and had your deliveries recorded against it. So the final stage in that particular process would be to record the invoice that you've just received from your supplier. Normally this process would begin by you receiving an invoice from your supplier. So on that invoice you would expect to find either the purchase order reference number that you supplied them in the beginning, or perhaps maybe even the job reference if it's the same thing, but that will be your own process that you have with your suppliers. So you'll be able to identify it with some form of reference number. So I'm going to go with the purchase order number in this case today. So I'll begin by looking for that order by simply doing find purchase order. And then in the reference containing here, I'm going to just simply type my reference. And here we can see we've got the one result, and we can click on the reference to take us into the purchase order. So if we scroll down, we can see here that we've ordered and recorded our delivery, and that the only step left is to record our invoice here. So the invoiced value at the moment is currently 0 because we haven't done it as yet. At the top of our purchase order sheet, you can see we've got the record invoice button, and this shows us the details of the purchase order, the reference, and we've already completed some of the data, but we'll begin at the top here. So what we're going to do is we're going to enter exactly what would be shown on the invoice that you've just received from your supplier. So first of all, confirming that this is indeed the correct order that you're supposed to be in, so comparing that against the order invoice that you've got in your hand. Then you'll be recording the invoice number. So somewhere on that invoice you'd expect to find a invoice reference from your supplier. That goes here, and as you can see, this is a unique value. It must be unique. If it isn't, it'll tell you you won't be able to proceed until it is unique. The tax point date is the date shown on that invoice. So using the date picker, of course, you can then change that to be the date that's shown. We do default to today's date. The next field here, this one may caption ever so slightly different in your system depending on how you've got your system set up. But what this is for is just the nominal code that you want to send any rounding discrepancies that occur between the header and the lines. So you might find that there's a couple of pence here and there. You might well want to attribute those to the rounding errors nominal code, just so that there's somewhere that those can be housed. And finally, on this top section here, we've got payment due date. This is when the supplier has said they want their payment by, and that would normally be shown in their payment terms on that invoice. We now move on to the numbers. So this yellow section here is the totals, so the main numbers on that invoice. So at the bottom usually of your supplier's invoice will be the subtotal, the net value, VAT, and of course the gross, and maybe even any discounts that are applied to that invoice. And then of course above those on your invoice you'll get all the order lines that exist as well. So what we need to do is we need to put exactly what is shown on that invoice onto this screen here. So we've assumed when we press our record invoice button that this particular invoice is going to be correct. So what we would look at we would compare the two, and we would make sure that the gross value of £42 is the same, the VAT is the same, and if there was a discount you could add it here. And again, this is the lines that are shown on your invoice. So if your supplier has sent you the same invoice for what you had as a delivered item, you would expect to find that it would match up. Now sometimes that is always not the case, so you can often get discrepancies between the invoice and what you actually had. If that is the case, then that's up to you how you want to deal with that, but you really probably you'd enter what they've sent you on this screen and then deal with the querying with the supplier separately, and then you might even credit that invoice off and re-raise it depending on what they've sent you. This case here, if let's say we change this, let's say the invoice said £45 instead of 42, and we said, say for example here, and that was £40, what we would expect to see is, can you see here where we have some rounding issue? This is where things don't match up between the header and the lines. and this is warning you that this doesn't quite marry up. Now of course you could simply ignore this and push this through for payment and that's all okay, or you could record it as this, put the purchase order to a status where you're going to query it with the supplier, and then you would deal with that however you would normally deal with your supplier, and then redo the invoice when you get it. But I'm going to assume that this is all good, and I'm going to put it back the way it was, and everything is back to normal, and I can now assign it to a nominal code if it's not the correct one on here, and I can obviously make sure that the VAT code is okay. Once I'm happy, I simply press continue. And now, as we can see, the purchase order has now gone to a status of fully invoiced. And if we scroll down here, the bar chart for the invoice is now complete, and we now have the ordered, delivered and invoiced values all matched up nicely here. And if we scroll further down, we can see that the sections for the invoices are also here as well. One final thing worth mentioning now at this particular point, now our invoice has been recorded against this purchase order, this won't get passed for payment if you're exporting your transactions into your financial software. It won't get passed until the particular invoice has been passed for payment within our system. So you can see here that it shows a status of unpassed. So that means that if you were to do your invoice exporting and send out your purchase invoices, this one won't go because it hasn't been approved yet. So if we click on our home button to take us to the dashboard, we can see how this process starts. So on our dashboard, I've got a purchase order here that doesn't have a cost code. That's very deliberate so we can see it straight away. This is a unpassed value of £35, which if you remember, that's the value of our invoice. So if we click on that, we can see here that we've got the opportunity to add any comments and provide statuses that we want to push this to. So we could move it to a status of refer to supplier or queried if we were going to quibble this invoice with our supplier. But if we're happy and we can pass this for payment, we can simply choose passed and then press continue to move that to a status where it will allow it to be exported from our system. Worth bearing in mind though, at this point, the users that can do this have got special privileges set up in their user account. So it may well be that you can't pass invoices for payment, or if you can, maybe you can only pass values up to a certain amount. So if this process doesn't allow you to proceed, then you may well need to consult with your line managers and get your permissions increased on our system. So I'm going to pass this one. So you can see here we've got it set to passed, and I press continue, and that has now been done successfully. And as you can see, there are now no more past invoices. And if I was to press on the home button now, we should expect now that the past value is showing at £35 and it's no longer unpassed. Well, that is the process for recording an invoice in the system, and also the bit at the end there where we showed how to pass an invoice for payment. If you've got any questions on any of this at all, then do feel free to give us a shout. We'd be happy to help you.